me to dance, taking a chance. Telling me to dance, taking a chance. Telling me to dance, taking a chance.
Hello, everybody. My name is Melody McAllister, and thank you so much for joining our book chat today. And if you've never joined before, we're so glad to have you, whether you're viewing on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. Thank you so much for joining. And today I have a special treat. I have a good friend. Actually, and before I say anything, I want to say congratulations on your first book birthday. Woo! For thinking about teaching. Yay! Happy birthday. Didn't it go by so fast, Dr. Casey?
It did, Melody. It was like boom, boom, boom. And then all of a sudden, we're right back to where we started.
It's true. So just a little background. Dr. Casey Jakubowski is my friend. We are both EduMatch authors. And the cool thing is that my book launched like right after your book launched last year. So unfortunately, yes, thank you. You're so sweet. But put my book down. This is about you. So unfortunately, though, they launched right before the pandemic. So we did see kind of a drop in sales because nobody cared about our new books during a pandemic. But it's okay, because the wonderful thing about thinking about teaching is that it's for all time. And it's funny because you even talk about germs and yuckies. There's a chapter in that. And I thought you didn't even know a pandemic was on the horizon. And I shouldn't be laughing. It's nothing to laugh about, but I just thought it was very interesting that you included that.
Yeah, it's so funny, Mel, because, everybody gets so normally when you're a teacher in the winter, you are in a hazard zone. It's a biohazard. You've got tissues, you've got bodily fluids, you've got kids coughing and hacking all over the place. And I'm not even talking about the high school. And right. You come home and you're just like, I feel a little feverish. And then you're thinking, oh boy, did I leave my emergency substitute plan? And then you think, no, I didn't. I got to drag myself in tomorrow. And the next day you wake up and your significant other, your partner, your animal, your friend goes, you're not going to make it today. And you just hope you can make it long enough to have the emergency substitute plan ready for the afternoon. Post lunch is the goal when you forget to write your emergency plan.
Yes, I know. I spent money on the teacher pay teacher, because I was an elementary teacher in the public school system. So I always got they sell all of these emergency subs plans, and it was a good investment. I'm not going to lie, because you and I both know we've gone in sick because it's easier to go and do it than to make substitute lesson plans. And we're going to talk about that. But before we get into your amazing and beautiful book, and I just want you to know that I loved your book so much. And I loved what you wrote. You said, "Dear Mel, thank you for being the sun or midnight sun." I like that because I'm in Alaska, of our EduMatch family. Thank you so much. That really meant a lot. I really appreciate it. But tell us about your background. And I know you're an 80s kid like me, but tell us about you.
Well, Mel, I started my life in Buffalo, New York, suburbia. I was born in a long, multi-generational family of Western New Yorkers of Polish and Irish descent, railroaders, all of them. Dad worked on the railroad, which is really important because my 4th birthday happened when he took me to see a train. Read about it in my book. But also my mom's a nurse. And so growing up, I was always wanting to do something with history. I wanted to be an Egyptologist. I wanted to be an archaeologist. I wanted to do something with history. And then I had this great idea of going to school to be a social studies teacher because I was really, 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 really just absolutely floored by some amazing teachers I had at my Hamburg High School Go Bulldogs class of 1995. And I wanted to be a social studies teacher. And so I went to SUNY Fredonia, Go Blue Devils, where I became a social studies teacher. And it was the late 90s. And as you remember, there wasn't a good market. And so I kind of sort of needed to take a job anywhere. And I was so fortunate that as an Eagle Scout, I was working out at summer camp, and my camp director was golfing buddies with a couple of people in a town that just so happened to need a social studies teacher. And so the day before school began, I was hired to teach in a school district. That was an eye-opening experience because I grew up in Hamburg, which is a nice urban suburban community. Buffalo's right there. The Bills Stadium was right there for football. Go Bills. I know you're a Chiefs fan. I won't hold it against you, but that's okay. So we had all this amazing stuff. And then my very first teaching job was in rural Cattaraugus County, where we had a grand total of 200 kids, grades K to 12.
Wow.
And it was a shock. It was a shock to me. And I got to tell you, as a social studies teacher, teaching 7th, 9th, 11th, and 12th grade, and OBT dubs, having the school district undergoing a consolidation study, totally changed my mindset. Fast forward, I got really interested into why rural schools don't like to merge because, I got to tell you something. I heard a lot of really nasty talk about rural people and how backwards they were and how anti-change they were and how they really did not want to make life better for their kids. And I thought, nope, that's not my experience. In the rural school districts I taught in, I saw parents striving, fighting, battling, tooth, nail to help their kids get a better education. They just wanted to be heard. So that led me to work on a PhD, which I finished, believe it or not, about the same time my book came out. So I wrote a book and a dissertation at the same time. Highly do not recommend you do that. That is a bad idea. But I want to have a huge shout out to Barb Lewis, who is my in-house editor. She helped me so much. And also to SUNY Albany, where I ran into a group of people who just loved rural education. And we became voices to help try and encourage people to change the narrative. And I use that hashtag a lot on social media. Hashtag change the narrative. But, I got to tell you, Mel, you know this up in Alaska. You know this in Texas. You know this. Rural people want what's best for their children.
Yes. You have an amazing quote. And dang it, I'm just trying to find it because it really touched me. And I have all these bookmarks, so I have a ton. You do say that in rural schools, you do what you have to do to survive. You say that in your book. And that is my experience with Alaskan teachers. So I hope that some of my fellow Alaskan teachers are watching, because when I have gone to conferences, they put on so many hats. And so I expect that you're going to tell me the same thing, that whether it's in Alaska rural or whether it's in New York, which when I think of New York, I think of the city, of course. I don't think of the rural schools. And that's what you talk about in here. So I think it's a really interesting thing. But you say that you do whatever you have to do. I'm going to try to find the quote that goes along with what you were just saying. Tell us about like some of the hats that you've had to wear.
Absolutely, Mel. And, it's really interesting because people do think New York is a urban state because we see New York City and Long Island. Two authors who I absolutely love from SUNY Oneonta, shout out to SUNY Oneonta, Greg Fulkerson and Alex Thomas, talk about something called urban normative or metrocentric. And
yes,
they as scholars are trying to get people to understand that in a rural school district, you are a teacher. You are a person who, if you did what I did, which is you gained the freshman 15 3 times and you've got to buy new clothes, you drop your slightly used clothes off to the local church because that may be something people need. You also, you do small things like making sure that a student never goes hungry, because if their lunch account is overdrawn, you slip the lunch lady $10 to help that lunch account come back into account. She'll slap your hand and say she took care of it already, but she'll always think that you're a nice person. You're also a coach. You're an advisor. And especially like if you were like me, a young teacher, you're also a graduate student. You're trying to earn your master's degree because in New York, we have to have it. And the other final thing is I could not understand this, but you've got to understand the rhythm and flow of a rural community. You've got to understand that you're always on point. If you go grocery shopping locally, you're going to have an impromptu parent-teacher
Yes.
conference. You're going to have an impromptu tutoring session. I will tell you, in the middle of the Blimpie sub one day, that was a chain in the local grocery store, I saw one of my students. He had dropped out. He had left with his economics book. He was 15 weeks away from graduating, but he needed to get out of there because his parents taught the school. He had gone to boot camp already. He was sick and tired of being treated like a kid. This young man had gotten through basic training in the U.S. Army, and he had to ask for a hall pass to go to the bathroom. Come on, that's not smart. So I said to him, got to tell you, Wayne, you're putting me in real trouble with the principal, because if I can't account for your economics book, it's going to come out of my salary. Please come in Monday. Just give me your book, And so Monday we happened to be talking about taxes and economics. And I said, Wayne, I know you're here. I know you just want to drop the book and run, but please just, sit down. Just tell me, what is the biggest shock that you got in your first paycheck from the U.S. Army? He said, they taxed everything. Everything's taxed. I cannot believe it, Casey. It's all taxed. He's like, oh, sorry, Mr. J. And I'm like, don't worry about it. You're a private first class in the U.S. Army. Don't worry, call me Mr. J anymore. You can call me Casey. Moral of the story is that I said, look, why don't you talk to us like we know you're an adult? Come to find out, he stayed. And why did he stay? He stayed because the silliest thing in the world happened. I asked him to please don't get me in trouble by taking his book with him. Now, the scary thing is that his younger brother was in 9th grade. His younger brother could have brought the book in. Heck, I could have assigned it to his younger brother. But if I didn't say to the young man, please come in, please bring that book, and please stay, he wouldn't have graduated.
I love that story, Dr. Casey. I absolutely love it. And that was one of the stories I marked up, and I'm glad you're sharing, because I was like, what do I want you to read aloud? And that was one of them that really touched me. And the quote that I was desperately trying to find that I thought was absolutely beautiful about rural educators and about a rural community, that those of us that are not living in a rural, you said that every student matters and is valuable in a rural community, that when they drop out, it affects everybody. That one student. And I wish I underlined it. I mean, like, it was supposed to be ready to go, so I apologize, because I wanted to read it verbatim, but it was beautiful. And you're giving a glimpse. Most of us, a lot of people don't write about rural education. It's just not something, like you said, metrocentric. We base a lot of what we do in schools. And I was probably going to wait till we got a little bit further, but there's so much about the impact of a zip code. We were talking before we went live. And can you tell us there's so much we could talk about in this that's in your book and just in general in life, but the impact of a zip code really matters. And you talk about in your book how you're trying to make changes because you don't want it to die in the rural areas. You do not want rural education to die. You also want students to have the same opportunities that if they went to like an upstate New York, where they would get all of these incredible opportunities, that you want them to have the same. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So, a lot of people are very proud of their area code, hashtag 716 Western New York, hashtag 518 for the Capital District, 607 where I taught, 585 where I taught, but here's the thing, Mel. I think we've got a real problem where the zip code has become almost a defining line, where some of the wealthiest and some of the poorest zip codes exist almost side by side. And it's scary when you think about it, because if you are born into a zip code that is high poverty, if you are born into a zip code of high wealth, your career path is totally different, and you could share a border with that zip code. I'm sorry to say this, but one of the areas that the United States has done very poorly in is identifying how to create opportunity for people without saying, well, if we use this piece of the pie, you can't have it. Because one of the
Right.
things is that as a social studies teacher and as somebody who knows a little bit about economics, I did after all teach it in 12th grade, we have to understand that you've always got to make the pie bigger. The economy is about making the pie bigger. The zip code should be a locator, but it shouldn't be a sentence. And that's the problem, is that a zip code has become a sentence. And this is scary to me because, you know, in the 70s, when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act came out on President Johnson's war on poverty, he from Texas saw rural America and realized, I've got to do something to make the world better for not only the rural students, but the urban students. And part of the problem that I think an author I so love is Campbell Scribner from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He writes about it in his book, The Fight for Local Control. He said that the American people push back on that basic fundamental that all people should have human rights. And he talked about the racism that happened. And, you know, this is a scary part because in Long Island, right, you have a huge, wealthy school district right next to one of the poorest school districts. If you were from Long Island or New York City, and I said Roosevelt, Wyandanch, Hempstead, Brentwood, Central Islip, Longwood, William Floyd, they have the same poverty levels as does upstate New York in places like Campbell, Savonia, West Valley, Little Valley, Cattaraugus County. You know, and I loved Mara Tekin's book, and I absolutely loved Robert Worthnow's book, as well as Kathy Kramer's book, all these books on rural anger. And one of the points that happened was this. People began to see the zip code as a sentence and not as an opportunity. You know, and please understand this. The American education system has been built on this idea of opportunity. But I question, especially with the fact that the new administration has just announced that they're going to have end of the year assessments, whose opportunity? Is it the testing companies or is it another opportunity? And as a teacher, I am begging the administration to say, no, we don't need to do that. You know? And I think, you know, I think, and I'm so glad that some of the Facebook users are popping up with these great quotes. And, you know, your little one that's visiting us, and that's the real reason why they're here, why we're here. We are trying to do what is best for the next generation. I'm 43 years old. Okay. My time has gone. My job now is to ensure that my niece and my nephew, Timmy and Abby, have opportunities I couldn't have. But I don't just want it to be Tibby and Abby. I want it to be Herbie and Annie and Maddie, who are my godchildren. And I want it to be Vinny, who is my nephew through my wife's family. I want opportunity also for the children in inner city Buffalo. And I also want it for children who are up in an Inuit village up in Alaska and down in the Texas Monongahela area. And if I mispronounce any of those, I apologize. I'm from Buffalo. I have a really bad accent.
I think I love what you're saying. And I'm pretty sure that when I try to quote you, I spelled things wrong. So yes, thank you so much. I don't know who this person is because it just says Facebook user, but yes. And I agree. And I love that you put, you know, in your book, you have amazing rural education practices. And so you really do highlight the things that they're doing well. And you also talk about how they can, thank you, Amanda. Sorry.
Okay.
So you do, like, you talk about how, like, you can use the rules, you know, the smaller class sizes to get to know your students better, because it truly matters. Like, the impact that student achievement matters in that community. But everything that you were just saying reminds me of where I lived in Texas. I lived in Dallas County for many years. I taught in Dallas County for many years, and we had a lot of resources, though. We had a lot of Title I resources, and so we were able to get amazing technology and wonderful things. But that wasn't true for all of the schools. Like I don't know how it just seemed like. And then you would go into areas where they had so much more. Like I thought we were blessed because I did start in a rural community teaching. I guess I forget about that sometimes, but I still have amazing contacts, so I shouldn't. But I did. My first 3 years of teaching were in a tiny little town in Texas. Um, and right across the border was in Oklahoma. Like just it was such an amazing difference just crossing the border from one state to another. You're talking about from cities to, the border of cities. It's truth. We do not talk about this often enough. And when we talk about the testing, you and I both know that it's not going to make anybody's lives better. Like what you said, like the politics and the money, it's already been funneled through, but it's not going to make students' lives better. It's not going to make wherever your zip code is. But I think it does punish people in certain zip codes a lot more than it does in other specific zip codes.
Absolutely. And, one of the areas that I think that is a best practice in rural areas that, larger schools try to do is they talk about creating teams. Jeffrey Canada's amazing work that he's done in the Harlem zone, some of the work that Say Yes to Education has done in Syracuse and now in Buffalo, but also, the work that people are doing to try to get to know their students. And, one of the saddest things that ever happened to me was we experienced a young woman who committed suicide in our rural school district. She was lost. We also had lost people to a car accident, young people to a car accident. And we had one of the earliest casualties during the Iraq War. And this would be Gulf Storm Part 2 after September 11th. And, Mel, I still think about it to this day. It's been darn near 20 years. And I still miss Isaac. And I still miss Tosh. And I still miss Heather, who was a teacher. Because, we have this area of such desperate need that the newspapers cover them or journalists cover them, but they use tropes. They use just rural America, farmers, yay, la, 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 hunters, wahoo. But in reality, if you look at it, what we've got to do is do a better job of asking those people who are telling our stories to tell our stories in conjunction with us. I want people to reach out and say to Kathy Kramer, hey, tell me about this rural anger that's going on in Wisconsin over elections. Or, hey, please, Robert Worthnow, can you explain to us why people view opportunity as lacking in rural areas and why they're so upset? Hey, Casey J, got a question for you. As a teacher who is in the trenches there, how does daily personal burnout really affect you? What's going on with your kids? And, Mel, I got to say this huge shout out to my dear friend, Nancy Hinckley at Syracuse University, because by God, if I didn't have Nancy there, I wouldn't have made it through 5 years, because Nancy literally taught me everything I knew about teaching. She taught me everything I knew about how to care for students. Syracuse University, you have such a resource in Nancy Hinckley, because Nancy she knows how you get to kids. And you know how you get to kids? Are you fed? Are you warm enough? Did you sleep okay? Do you need something? Because honest to God, it's Maslow. It's Maslow. It's the bottom of the pyramid, Maslow. And in so many zip codes, right? We don't have fresh food because they're food deserts. We don't have opportunity to hear multiple stories. We don't have multiple places of joy. We need a huge reinvestment in the infrastructure of our little towns, but our big towns, we need people to stop buying a third and a fourth island. We need them to go back and say to a local food bank, right? If I won the lottery tomorrow, I would go to my local food bank and I would go, how much is it going to cost to end hunger in my area? And I would write that check, because we've got to go back to the ethics of humanism, which is all humans have value.
Amen. Man, I can feel your passion coming through, and I totally agree with you. And especially as a mother, like today, just keeping my kids drinking water. I mean, if we don't take care of the health, you talk about in your book about how, but the demands on teachers, because our kids aren't getting what they need, and then we take it back and make the teachers responsible for all of that. And you talk about, again, the elections and the rural anger and some of the division. I think a great amount of division in our country could be healed a little bit more if we actually talked about those things instead of shoving it under, putting a label on it and acting like it doesn't matter, because you're right, it does matter. It has consequences. I did find that quote that I really wanted to read. And is it okay if I read it out loud?
Of course.
This is probably, and it's on page 198 in your book. And it says, what I realized more than anything else is that every child in a community that is small is valued. All the teachers know the family and their students. When one of the seniors dropped out, it impacted everyone. And I just thought that was absolutely beautiful, Dr. Casey. I just thought it was a great way to celebrate, because again, we just addressed some of the problems of the impact of a zip code, but there's also benefits of, living in a zip code, and especially in a rural area. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful that you were able to capture that truth. So yeah, I can't believe I couldn't find it.
No, and Mel, the next one down, I think, is this idea where it says the system is not a system in a small rural community. It is an extended family.
Yes.
I think that's one of the areas that we have asked teachers to do without giving them the support. And especially right now, as we're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of mass lockdowns from the pandemic. And I know Seattle and Washington were some of the earliest victims of the pandemic and the lockdown. We have asked teachers to do Herculean efforts. And at the very beginning of it, people were going, my God, we need to pay teachers whatever they want. They're worth it. And now it's like, my God, we need to get teachers back into the classroom because we need to get back to work. And I saw this quote on Facebook, and I thought that this is so critical, is this point. And I want to share this with you because you hear it from the mouths of your guests, and they speak truth. And the person who was from overseas said, what is it with your Americanism concern about work and productivity? How have they bankrupted you morally and spiritually? And how have they brainwashed you so that in the midst of a once in 100-year pandemic where 500,000 people have died, that people are going, we got to get back to work. We got to be productive. We got to blah. And, this is where the educators see the burnout, and they feel the burnout, and they feel this notion of, oh my gosh, the analogy of the spoons. I have no more spoons to give today. Well, I hate to say this, but not only have I moved from the spoons, but I've given out forks and knives and other cutlery. Heck, I'm up to the stirring spoons and the serving forks. Heck, I've even gone into the plates. I'm done. I ain't got anything to set the table with. But you know what? The fact of the matter is that what makes teachers great is that they keep going back day in and day out, because they believe that not only is it about a career, not only is it about their so-called amazing benefits and their pensions, right? Which everybody should have, by the way. It shouldn't be limited to just teachers. Everybody should have universal health care. Everybody should have universal pensions. Heck, I believe that people should have at least a little bit of an income so that what they can do every year is do something for fun for themselves. The average teacher spends $5,000 a year, if I read the data correctly. out of their own pocket to do
Wow.
stuff in their classroom. $5,000 a year. And Melody, my starting salary was $26,200 back in the 90s.
Well, mine was 27 and it was in the early 2000s. And that was in a rural area. Believe me, I know. And I know, I love what you're saying. Um, we are getting close to the end of the broadcast. And before we talk about how can we follow you, do you mind doing a little bit of a read aloud? We talked
Sure.
before we went on. There was so much about your book that I absolutely love. And before you do your read aloud, or as you find that area, I just want to say that y'all, this book is such a great book for a book study. At the end of every section that Dr. Casey talks about, he leaves questions to reflect on, to tweet about. But I think it lends itself very naturally for teachers. And whether you're in rural or urban, it doesn't matter. There's great reflective questions, and there's just good pedagogy in here. And so I wanted to give you a shout out for that because I really enjoyed it. And your heart for students and communities is so real. And the reason I asked you to read the specific part that is because it came from a wonderful family, and you're giving shout outs to Nancy and to Syracuse University. I want you to give a shout out to your amazing family. I thought it was such a beautiful tribute.
So, well, here's the funny thing, Mel. I think it comes better from the heart than reading it aloud, because what I want to say is this. My parents taught us to give back. They taught us to be servants to the community. My father became a chemist, and he worked in New York State's Department of Labor, helping people during the asbestos cleanup, causing mesothelioma to people and killing them. My mother became a nurse. She worked with abused children who were committed to psychiatric centers. My parents taught us that our role in society was to help others. I went into education. I am the least of my brother and my sister because my brother Nick fixes computers at Erie County Community College. What he does is he ensures that students, professors, administrators, and others have access to technology, and many of them are first-gen students. My sister now goes on and does quality control at cancer research centers around the United States, ensuring that they're going to help children. And as a family, Mel, we lost our little brother, Adam. He died because somebody didn't do something ethical. Somebody didn't say, stop. I don't think this is right. And so when they gave my mother the medication, it caused Adam severe and profound birth defects. And he died not much longer after he was born. And as a family, what we are doing is we are trying to help others, to raise them, to understand. You have an obligation to society to not only take care of your fellow citizens and your fellow neighbors. If they're not citizens, it shouldn't matter. But what you also have to do is you have to say, wait, stop. That's not right. And I think that that's what I want people to leave with, is when they read Thinking About Teaching, is that I ask people to make decisions that will not help them, but help others.
Wow. And you said it from the heart, and it was almost verbatim from the book. I love it. And I feel your heart throughout every single one of these pages. And I just want to ask anybody who's watching, this is a great book to pick up. And it's for every teacher, for every educator. Dr. Casey, thank you so much for joining. Everybody in our community, whether it was from Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, thank you so much. Put my book down. Again, happy book birthday to you. Your family is amazing. I am so sorry for the sacrifice that you all had to go through and to lose your brother, Adam. I want you to know that the legacy that your family is putting out there is truly amazing. And we'll see you again next week, everybody. I did drop links to follow Casey on Facebook, and I put a link in there to grab his book. So check it out, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Thank you.